How many of you plan to see the new movie, Mel Gibson's The Passion of Jesus Christ? Nearly everyone is. We have tickets for the second showing in Tyler, as it turns out, courtesy of one of the churches in Tyler that bought up a whole theater on that occasion, and a friend of ours has tickets and shared them with us, so we'll be seeing the second showing of Mel Gibson's The Passion. When the Pope viewed The Passion, he is said to have remarked, "It is as it was." Now, the Vatican has ever since been trying to spin that remark to bring it back into bounds, because it really goes beyond what the Pope would normally do to endorse any movie in that way. But I have very little doubt in my mind that the Pope said exactly that. It is as it was, because that is the avowed object of the movie, to tell the story of the suffering of Jesus exactly as it was. But that seems to be where the real problem lies. If the Pope was right, it is not Mel Gibson's movie that is the problem. It's the Bible. Very few things I have read have underlined that, as an article in the February 15th Newsweek by John Meacham. His article was titled, "Who Killed Jesus?" In the article, he basically asks, does the death, the execution of Jesus Christ, lie at the feet of the Jewish people? The answer is no. His answer, and mine, and every other thinking person would answer that question, no. But making that simple denial does not tell the whole story. According to Meacham, the Bible can be a problematic source, and I'm quoting, and that underlines the problem with Mel Gibson's movie. It is based not on historical accounts, but on the Bible itself. Meacham continues, Scripture is not always a faithful record of historical events. The Bible is the product of human authors who were writing in particular times and places with particular points to make and visions to advance. When the gospel authors implicated the Jews in Jesus' passion, they did not mean all Jewish people then alive, much less those then unborn. The writers had a very specific group in mind, the temple elite that believed Jesus might provoke Pilate. That last statement, I think, is correct. That actually the writers of the Gospels did have in mind, when they said the Jews, a particular group of people, the temple elite. In my work that I've done on this subject, I call them the Jewish religious establishment of the time. Not the Jewish people as a whole. It could hardly be that way, because all of Jesus' disciples at this time were all Jewish. So that everyone on there, Jesus himself was Jewish. Everyone on all sides of this drama was Jewish. So consequently, we're not laying blame upon a people in this situation. Many of the people who believed in Jesus Christ and later would give their lives for him were also Jewish people. At the same time, I think we need to pause for just a moment to take some exception with what John Meacham has said here. When he says the Scripture is not always a faithful record of historical events, I take exception with that. I will agree that the New Testament is not intended to be history. That is not why it was written. What the New Testament, particularly the four gospel accounts, which tell us about the death of Jesus Christ, what these are the testimony of witnesses to the events that took place. The testimony of witnesses are not history, but they are crucial in writing history. They are crucial in understanding history. And when we read the accounts, we are like members of a jury who sit and listen to four different witnesses tell us what happened in the events of Jesus' ministry, the events leading up to the Last Supper, to the events of that whole long, terrible night, and to his death, his crucifixion the next day. And you and I on the jury are asked to listen to that and to decide, do we believe these witnesses or do we not? And of course, great, huge, so many of the population of the world, even to this day, have come to the conclusion, of course we believe those witnesses. How could anyone not read those accounts and believe the truth that they say? Now, to simply say they are not historical accounts is accurate as far as it goes, but it's not really the truth in that it doesn't tell the whole story. Later he will say this. He says, Gibson set out to stick to the Gospels and has made virtually no nod to critical analysis or context. As an artist, of course, he has the right to make any movie he wants, and many audiences will find the story vivid and familiar. The film Gibson has made, however, is reviving an ancient and divisive argument: who really killed Jesus? As a matter of history, the Roman Empire did. End quote. I consider that statement misleading. It is true that the man who actually gave the order for the execution of Jesus was Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor of Judea at this time. The men who actually drove the nails through his hands into that piece of wood that was the stake upon which he would be raised up between heaven and earth, those men were Roman soldiers. And in fact, it was the Roman judiciary system that did this. But to say that the Roman Empire killed Jesus leaves an enormous amount out of the story. He goes on to say, to take the film's account of the Passion literally will give most audiences a misleading picture of what probably happened in those epical hours so long ago. The Jewish priests and their followers are the villains demanding the death of Jesus again and again. Pilate is a malleable governor forced into handing down the death sentence. Now, I have not seen Mel Gibson's movie yet. I'm looking forward to seeing it, and you can draw your own conclusions at that. I do not find the gospel accounts presenting him as a malleable governor in any stretch of the word. I consider them presenting him as a man who had the authority of life and death over Jesus or anybody else, in fact, that came before him at that time. He could decide to let a man go. He could decide to hold on to him. He had his own decisions to make and his own reasons for making them. Malleable? Well, if Mel Gibson's movie presents him as malleable, they have indeed misrepresented Pontius Pilate. You will have to watch the movie when you get your chance and see what you judge. In fact, Meacham goes on to say, in the age of Roman domination, only Rome crucified. The crime was sedition, not blasphemy, a civil crime, not a religious one. The two men who were killed along with Jesus are identified in some translations as thieves, but the word can also mean insurgents, supporting the idea that crucifixion was a political weapon used to send a message to those still living. Beware of revolution or riot, or Rome will do this to you. The two earliest and most reliable extra-biblical references to Jesus, Josephus and Tacitus, say Jesus was executed by Pilate. The Roman prefect was Caiaphas, that is the high priest's political superior, and even controlled when the Jewish priests could wear their vestments and thus conduct Jewish rites in the temple. Pilate was not the humane figure Gibson depicts. We'll withhold judgment on that. But we will step back to the gospel. The gospels do not depict Pilate as a humane governor. They depict him as a Roman governor. And for the Romans, their law was everything. According to Philo of Alexandria, the prefect was of inflexible, stubborn, and cruel disposition and known to execute troublemakers without a trial. I don't doubt that for a moment. There is nothing in the biblical account that would lead me to think otherwise. Even tyrants have some sense of right and wrong. As a matter of fact, it's clear from the account Pilate did not see Jesus as a problem apart from the priests. Now, if you read the New Testament, if you read through the gospel accounts, you will know how true this is. Jesus would never have come to Pilate's attention except that the high priest and his cohort brought him there. Otherwise, he would have never seen him. It was not the Romans who arrested Jesus. It was not the Romans who accused Jesus. But continue with Meacham. Given these rivalries, we can begin to understand the origins of the unflattering gospel image of the temple establishment. The elite looked down on Jesus' followers, so the New Testament authors portrayed the priests in a negative light. Well, of course, there's also the possibility that they could be seen in a negative light by any dispassionate observer at the time. We can also see why the writers, quoting Meacham, downplayed the role of the ruling Romans in Jesus' death. The advocates of Christianity, then a new struggling faith, understandably chose to placate, not to antagonize, the powers that were. Why remind the world that the earthly empire that still ran the Mediterranean had executed your hero as a revolutionary? It's pure theory, not really supported by any external evidence. Really, in fact, the primary historical sources that we have for these events are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. 4 witnesses whom, if you're a careful student of the Bible, you'll realize are independent witnesses, but that's another subject for another day. Meacham says the Gospels were composed to present Jesus in the best possible light to potential converts in the Roman Empire and to put the temple leadership in the worst possible light. That is his theory. On the other hand, what if the Gospels present them in the light in which they should be, in the light of day, so that one actually sees what was done? He could not, and my question, of course, is how could one not present Jesus in a good light? The statement is a suggestion that the Gospel accounts are dishonest, that they are political spin. Now, you should know that for a good many years, people looked upon the New Testament Gospels as late documents. Many scholars thought they were written as late as 150, and that they were not written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, that they were developed in the church over time, and that they were ways in which the church presented itself to the modern world. Meacham seems to be laboring under that particular impression. But as time has gone on, scholarship has changed, and many people do not realize the degree to which scholarship has pushed back the writing of the New Testament documents. In fact, there are right now only 27 documents that make any claim whatsoever to being original Christian documents that can be dated to the first century. And they are the only ones. And they happen to be the 27 books that you find in the New Testament. None others can be dated to the first century, and in fact, not that late in the first century, which means they were written while the apostles were still alive to either affirm or contradict the testimony that was given in these documents. Again, you'll find an awful lot of writers who write for the public are still not really aware of the degree to which scholarship has moved in the direction of the authenticity of New Testament documents, how early they were and how true they were. Finishing off with Meacham here, clear evidence of the political nature of the execution, that Pilate and the high priest were ridding themselves of a Messiah who might disrupt society, not offer salvation, is the sign, the critical evidence of it, is the sign that Pilate ordered affixed to Jesus' cross. The message is not from the knowing Romans to the evil Jews. It is a scornful signal to the crowds that this death awaits any man the pilgrims proclaim the King of the Jews. That's true enough, but that story is also clear in the Gospels as far as that part of the warning that Pilate put there. Also, it's a matter of fact that the Jews resisted that and did not like that sign being up there, and Pilate says, what I have written, I have written. Because it seems apparent to me that Pilate was vastly annoyed by these men who had come to them, was very much turned off by what they had done, and had every in his mind to use whatever put down he could use for them. My suggestion is that we should take a look at the record. I consider the 4 gospel accounts that you have there in your Bible actually valid historical artifacts. Now, of course, I consider them much more than that. I consider them the inspired Word of God, but whenever you're approaching this with someone like this, or someone who hasn't accepted that yet, then what you do is you lay them out and you say, here I've got them. I've got 4 eyewitness accounts. Let's call them affidavits. Would you prefer to call them depositions? Unfortunately, we can't cross-examine these gentlemen, but we can compare their accounts one with the other, and we can come to our own conclusions about what we read there. These are as important as any inscription in stone would be. I don't know why it is, but so many people seem to think that inscriptions in stone are better evidence than writings like this on paper, but nevertheless, that's as it may be. We all consider them, as I said, the inspired Word of God. The fellow writing this article, he's not there. They are, as I said, depositions or affidavits. You are the jury. You're going to have to read them, and you're going to have to decide, do you believe them or don't? That's what any jury must do with depositions, with testimony that they receive. When you look at a crime and try to judge guilt or innocence, I've heard there are 3 major themes you follow. They are motive, means, and opportunity. These are the things that they want to know when they're considering whether or not someone did something or not. And the question he is asking is, who killed Jesus? Who had a motive for the killing of Jesus? This has to be the first question you ask. Why was it done? Who wanted him dead? Who stood to gain by this crime when it was going to be committed? Who had a motive for the killing of Jesus? I'd call your attention to the testimony of John in chapter 5, verse 13. John chapter 5, verse 13. Jesus had healed a gentleman, and the fellow who he healed didn't even know who he was. You know, he just be healed and walked away, and the fellow all of a sudden is whole. And he didn't know. But afterward, Jesus found him in the temple, verse 14, and said, Behold, you are made whole. Don't sin any more, lest a worse thing come to you. So the man went to the Jews then and told them that it was Jesus who had made him whole. Up until this time, he didn't know, they didn't know. It was just God. He had had mercy upon this poor fellow and healed him. Therefore did the Jews persecute Jesus and sought to slay him because he had done these things on the Sabbath day. But Jesus answered them and saying, My Father worked hitherto, and I work. And the Jews sought the more to kill him because he not only had broken the Sabbath, but also that God said that God was his Father, making himself equal with God. So we know from testimony that the Jews had expressed the fact that they wanted to kill Jesus. They had actually conspired to kill Jesus, had worked to kill Jesus long before this ever came about. The reason that was being given on this occasion was that Jesus was working on the Sabbath day. Now, you'll have to bear with me on this one, because when you got a poor guy who's crippled and lame and been lame ever since he was born lying around here at the pool, and Jesus walks up to him and says, Hey, take up your bed and walk, and the guy stands up and walks and goes off carrying his bed. This was work? I mean, be healed. There's a poor guy in the synagogue. He's got this withered arm and all tied up here like this, had it all of his life, and everybody who's ever known him has known he had it. Jesus laid his eyes on him in the synagogue on a Sabbath day and said, Stretch out your hand. And he stretched out his hand, and it became whole just like the other one. I would say anyone standing there would not have a single hair still lying flat on their body. It'd all be standing up when you see something like that take place. And the Jews wanted to kill Jesus because he had done this, because he had broken the Sabbath day. Now, this is in the Bible. This is the testimony. This is what we've got. And this is what Mel Gibson claimed to be working with when he did his work. That is, he wanted to do it exactly as the Bible said it was. And his answer would probably be, if you have a problem with it, take it up with the writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. All right, the reason they gave for wanting Jesus dead were religious. I don't buy that. How many times have you seen courtroom dramas? Very few of us have ever been in court to see it ourselves, but we sure have seen it on television a lot, where evidence of statements made by the defendant are used in court as evidence of motive and of intent. You know, if a man said he wanted to kill somebody, if he swore he was going to kill him, if he made comments about wanting him dead, these things are often introduced into court as evidence to show intent or motive. Now, here's my question. Who were these people who wanted Jesus dead? Were they Romans? No. Who were they? They were Jews. They were, from all indications, synagogue leaders. I doubt very seriously if you can lay this at the door of everybody who was in the synagogue on that day. I have very little doubt that many people who were there and saw that poor man's hand healed were absolutely amazed and believed in Jesus when they saw it. I have little doubt of that. So these were not either, nor were these the Jewish people. It was a cadre of Jews. He calls them, Meacham calls them the temple elect. I call them the Jewish religious establishment. Take your choice, as long as you acknowledge they weren't Romans. Was their plot known? John's testimony again, chapter 7, verse 25. John 7, verse 25. Then said some of them of Jerusalem, Isn't this he whom they seek to kill? Lo, he speaks boldly, and they say nothing to him. Do the rulers know indeed that this is very Christ? So it was known. The people are seeing, here's Jesus walking down the street, here's Jesus teaching in the temple, and they say, wait a minute, isn't that the one that the rulers in the temple want dead? So it was already known. John testifies further. Chapter 11, verse 11. John 11, verse 47. Then gathered the chief priests and the Pharisees a council and said, What are we going to do? This man does many miracles. If we let him thus alone, all men will believe on him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. At this point, we have really come to the question of motive. Why did they want to do something about Jesus? Because if Jesus led a revolution, if people all began to turn to Jesus Christ, they feared that the Romans would come in and take away their place. They were concerned about power. They were concerned about their position. And they feared Jesus because he was a threat to the status quo. And these men would rather have continued under Roman domination with their position of authority under Roman domination, where the Romans told them when to come, where to go, what to wear when they got there. They would rather have continued under that than to have been liberated from it, if it kept them in positions of power and authority, to where men would do deference to them. He said one of them, named Caiaphas, being the high priest that year, said, "You know nothing at all, nor consider that it is expedient for us that one man should die for the people, and the whole nation perish not." This is the high priest speaking. This he spoke not of himself, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation. And not for that nation only, but for them, not for that nation only, but also he should gather together in one the children of God that were scattered abroad. From that day forward, they took counsel together to put him to death. So what John testifies is there was an ongoing conspiracy to the death of Jesus in the temple elite, the religious establishment of the time. Who had a motive? The priests. Did the Romans, have they come into the picture? Were any of these people Romans? No. Well, why is this thing about the Romans? Why is this such a big factor? Not too long ago, I read a book called Jesus the Jewish Theologian. I think the author's name was Young. And he was at great pains in his book to try to exculpate the Jews, the Jewish people, in the death of Jesus Christ. And therefore, he went to great lengths to blame the Romans. It was the Romans. Everything was the Romans. Why are they doing this? Well, the reason is not hard to find. The reason is that down through generations of time, people have used these scriptures as an excuse to persecute the Jewish people. They have considered this a blood guilt that has continued all the way from the first century down to our century, and they've used it to justify the killing, abuse, torture, imprisonment of Jews down to our day. Certainly to our generation, and I expect to our day, this type of thing is being done. And so consequently, there is a move afoot among theologians and others to kind of help or try to avoid this type of thing from going on. The Vatican has made their moves to try to make peace with the Jewish people and to try to in some way atone for the things that have been done by Christians to Jews down through history. And that's all well and good. We absolutely should exculpate all Jewish people in the modern world from the death of Christ, at least as far as we are exculpated from it, which sometimes isn't very far. But my point simply is this. They are justified in doing this. They are not justified, however, in distorting history to make that point. And Meacham, in my opinion, does in this article. The people who had a motive for Jesus' death were the Jewish temple elite, not the Jewish people and not the Roman government at the time. Now, what about opportunity? Well, in Matthew chapter 26, Matthew's testimony we'll turn to now. In Matthew chapter 26, he says, "Then assembled the chief priests and the scribes and the elders of the people under the palace of the high priest, who is called Caiaphas. And they consulted that they might take Jesus by subtlety and kill him. But they said, not on the feast day, lest there be an uproar among the people. We have got to find our way of getting this job done. If an opportunity doesn't present itself, we're going to have to somehow make one. We don't want to take him on the feast day. That would create a big uproar. But we are going to have to do something about it." So we have a conspiracy of the temple elite to find an opportunity to kill Jesus. This is the separate testimony of both Matthew and of Mark. Were there any Romans involved in this conspiracy? No, not at this time. Romans have not even shown up in the account in any way. We have no testimony to any involvement or even them being aware of the problem among the Romans. Further, on the question of opportunity, Matthew 26, verse 14. 26:14. "Then one of the 12, called Judas Iscariot, went to the high priest and said, What will you give me that I will deliver him unto you? And they covenanted with him for 30 pieces of silver. And from that time he sought opportunity to betray him. Opportunity. When can we get this done? Where will be the circumstances? When will he be away from the multitudes? When will he be alone? When we can take him without creating a riot in the process? Matthew continuing in verse 47. While he yet spoke, Jesus yet spoke, lo, Judas, one of the 12, came, and with him a great multitude with swords and staves from the chief priests and elders of the people. Now he that betrayed them had given them a sign, saying, whomever I kiss, that same is he, hold him fast. And he came to Jesus and said, Hail, Master, and kissed him. And Jesus said to him, Friend, where have you come from? Then they came and laid hands on Jesus and took him. And behold, one of them that were with Jesus stretched out his hand, drew his sword, struck a servant of the high priest, and cut off his ear. Now let's not be misunderstood here. This is not an indictment of the Jewish people. It is an indictment, and it is an indictment of the temple elite. For these are the people who conspired to find opportunity to kill Jesus. These are the people who stood to benefit by his death. These are the people who had a motive for getting rid of him and declared their own motive for him, even though they tried to disguise it by religious means for a while. They finally had to own up to the fact that they had to do it lest the Romans come and take away their place in their nation. It was political, pure and simple. And so far, no Romans, no Pilate are involved in the conspiracy at all. First trial. Matthew chapter 26, verse 57. They that had laid hold on Jesus took him away to Caiaphas the high priest, where the scribes and the elders were assembled. Peter followed a long way off into the high priest's palace and went in and sat down with the servants to see the end. Now the chief priests and the elders and all the council sought false witness against Jesus to put him to death, but found none. Though many false witnesses came, yet found they none. They just couldn't find it. What they were looking for was some excuse whereby they might kill him. And they couldn't really get it done. They tried with everything that they could do, but there just was nothing there. And then finally they found themselves two witnesses that said, this fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and build it in 3 days. And the high priest rose and answered to Jesus, or said to Jesus, are you going to answer nothing? Because up until this time, Jesus had not said a word. And he said, you're not going to say anything? What is about these witnesses that are witnessing against you? And he wouldn't say anything. There was no need for him to, because they had proved nothing. They had no case. There was no reason for him to even open his mouth. And finally the high priest said, I adjure you by the living God that whether you be the Christ, the Son of God. Now that statement is considerably more than what we do in our court, where when you're called as a witness, you go on the stand, they put your hand on the Bible. I don't know if we still do that anymore, but you raise your right hand and solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God, putting you under the penalty of perjury at that point if you lie. In the Old Testament, whenever the people of the community was gathered around, they would read the adjuration. That is, they would adjure anyone present who had any knowledge of the facts of the case to come forward and present those facts. If indeed you had any knowledge whenever the voice of adjuration was heard, when the proclamation went out, if you have testimony in this case, come forward. If you failed to come forward, don't worry about subpoenas. They didn't bother with that. If you failed to come forward when you had testimony and had evidence, and they later found that you did have that evidence and did not come forward, once the voice of adjuration had been reached, you were guilty. You were guilty, I suppose, of what they would call the equivalent of perjury, whether it be giving false witness, but I think they would consider it to have been false witness if you failed to give testimony of the truth if you had it. And so consequently, you had to pay the penalty of the law. So when he said to him, I adjure you, this is the high priest, this is a legitimate court up until this point, I adjure you that you tell us whether you be the Christ, the Son of God. Jesus, by law, had to answer. He couldn't keep quiet at this point because of the adjuration. He said, you have said. Yes, that's what that means. You have said it. Nevertheless, I say unto you, hereafter you shall see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of power and coming in the clouds of heaven. The high priest rent his clothes, saying, He has spoken blasphemy. What need have we of witnesses? Behold, you have heard his blasphemy. So, I suppose they had their occasion. And one really wonders at this point why they didn't just take Jesus out and stone him to death. Because they tried it with Stephen. In fact, they succeeded with Stephen. They stoned Stephen to death without so much as a whisper. They just did it. It wasn't lawful for them to put any man to death, but the Jews weren't very careful about the laws of the Romans and what the Romans let them do or what they didn't do. They might very well have stoned him to death and gone away, and then the Romans come find him and say, well, we don't know who did this, and gone their way. Why didn't they? That, I think, is one of the more fascinating questions that might be asked about this. In chapter 26 now, verse 66. What do you think? They answered, He's guilty of death. So they spit in his face and buffeted him, and others smote him with the palm of their hand, saying, Prophesy to us, you Christ, who is he that smote you? So, where was Jesus tried and convicted on the charge of blasphemy? It was in the Jewish high court, before the Jewish high priest, before all the leadership of the temple, before the temple elite. Was there a Roman in the story? No. There was no Roman in the story whatsoever. So we have established who had the motive, who created the opportunity. We're still left with the question of the means. For some reason, the leaders did not want to stone Jesus, which was the usual penalty for blasphemy. And I doubt seriously that they really knew why. But Matthew chapter 27, we start heading on down the line so that we can perhaps come to understand why. When the morning was come, all the chief priests and elders of the people took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. And when they had bound him, they took him away and delivered him to Pontius Pilate, the governor. Now, at long last, we have got a Roman. And we have him before Pilate, the governor. Matthew 27, verse 11. Meanwhile, Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor said, Are you the king of the Jews? Jesus said, Yes, it is as you say. When he was accused by the priests and elders, he gave no answer. And Pilate says, Don't you hear the testimony they're bringing against you? But Jesus made no reply, not even to a single charge, to the great amazement of the governor. Verse 17. So when the crowd had gathered, Pilate said, who do you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus who's called the Christ? For he knew, this is crucial, he knew that it was out of envy that they had handed Jesus over to him. Now sure, Pilate was a hard-headed man. Sure, he was a cruel tyrant. Sure, he had the power of life and death over any man that walked into his presence. But he wasn't stupid. And whenever he realized clearly that they had brought him because of envy, that this was a Jewish power move, it was a power move having to do with their own religious community, he actually, I think in many ways, intended to step on their toes, intended to jab them, intended to cause a problem with it. He said, what about this? What, don't you want me to release Barabbas? And while Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat, his wife sent him a message. Don't have anything to do with that innocent man. For I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him. Now, we could talk about this as being Pilate being soft-hearted. It has nothing to do with that. I expect his wife did have a dream, and she came to tell him about the dream. And he was somewhat perturbed by this, because Romans were not an unsuperstitious people. He goes on to say, the priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus executed. Which of the two do you want me to release to you? Asked the governor. Barabbas, they answered. What shall I do with Jesus who is called Christ? Pilate asked. They all answered, crucify him. And Pilate asked, why? What crime has he committed? They all shouted the louder, crucify him. It's a mob. Once a mob gets going, all you're going to get is more noise. When Pilate saw he was getting nowhere, but that an uproar was starting, he took water, washed his hands in front of the crowd, and said, I am innocent of this man's blood. It is your responsibility. I have absolutely no doubt Pilate did exactly that. It was public. Everyone saw what Pilate did on this occasion, and I have very little doubt that he had his reasons for doing it. It was political. No other reason for him It wasn't a question of being tender-hearted. It was political. The establishment, what he intended to do, was to establish the fact that it was not him. It was the temple elite that did this. And so he did. And he said, it's your responsibility. And all the people answered, let his blood be on us and on our children. And this is a line that I understand Mel Gibson has taken out of the movie, because perhaps the line isn't in John's gospel anyway. It's only in Matthew, but it's too inflammatory, I guess he thought, because of people's attitudes, because of anti-Semitism and what have you. But he did remove that, I understand, from the movie. But it's in the record. It's still in the record, the court records, if you will, because Matthew testified to it. John Meacham wrote, Pilate was not the humane figure Gibson depicts. According to Philo of Alexander, the prefect was of inflexible, stubborn, and cruel disposition, and known to execute troublemakers without trial. I see nothing in the historical record that in any way conflicts with the story of Pilate I find in the Gospels. How the actor will portray Pilate in the movie, we'll have to wait and see. He knew that the Jews had delivered up Jesus for envy. He tried to let him go, but politically, he couldn't do it. John 19 now, returning to his testimony. Verse 7. The Jews answered him, we have a law, and by our law he ought to die, because he made himself the Son of God. When Pilate heard that saying, he was even the more afraid. And he went into the judgment hall, and he said to Jesus, where do you come from? Whence are you? And Jesus didn't answer. Pilate said, are you not going to speak to me? Don't you know I have the power to crucify you, and I have the power to release you? Jesus answered, you could have no power at all against me, except it were given to you from above. Therefore he that delivered me unto you has the greater sin. I suppose what he is saying is, he, Caiaphas, who delivered me unto you, has the greater sin. You would have no power over me at all, except it was given to you from above. From henceforth Pilate sought to release him, but the Jews cried out, saying, if you let this man go, you are not Caesar's friend. Whoever makes himself a king speaks against Caesar. They played what they thought at that point, at long last, their trump card. That if you don't deal with this man, we're going to have an insurrection on our hands. And if we get an insurrection going here and the Roman army has to put it down, you're going to be called on the carpet before Caesar. And Pilate may have been a cruel man. He may have been an unjust man, but he was also a politically savvy man. That was something he didn't want to have to deal with it. The life of this one Jew was not worth it to Pilate. He asked them, though, said, shall I crucify your king? And this, to me, is the cruelest line in the entire account. They answered, we have no king but Caesar. No king but Caesar. When, if you know the story of the Bible, the trouble Israel kept getting into down through all their generations was they kept forgetting who their real king was. When you see the movie, if you see it, you can judge for yourself. By all accounts, the problem is not with the movie. The problem is with the Bible, because the Bible is pretty explicit about this. But the Bible does not place the blame on any group of people. This is different. John chapter 12, verse 31. Now is the judgment of this world. Now shall the prince of this world be cast out. And I, if I be lifted up from the earth, will draw all men unto me. This he said, signifying what death he should die. That's why the Jews were not allowed to stone Jesus. Because he had to be lifted up from the earth, like Moses lifted up the servant in the wilderness, so that men would look to him and live and not die. The Jews were not allowed to stone Jesus for at least two reasons. One, it was not the death intended. And two, the guilt was not to be laid to the Jews alone. And this is important. For indeed, if the Jewish establishment had taken him out and stoned him, There really might have been seen down through history to be some kind of justification for the continual persecution of the Jews for the death of Jesus. But because they weren't the agents that put him to death, the Gentile power of the day was the one that actually drove the nails in his hands, that stuck him up there between earth and heaven, and finally jammed the spear into his side. Because they brought him and they killed him, it symbolically says that the whole world is guilty of the blood of Jesus Christ. And I think when we begin to understand that, we can understand what Mel Gibson was trying to say, if I understand him. This question was answered, by the way, long ago. It was answered in the Hebrew Scriptures, Isaiah chapter 53. Isaiah chapter 53, verse 3. He was despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows, of sickness, and acquainted with pain. And we hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. I guess we thought he had it coming, and God just gave it to him. But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. It was not one group of people. It wasn't one man. It wasn't Rome. It wasn't the Jews. It was all of us.